Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Furniture Sector Outlook webinar session. This is the second session of a two-part series, which you may recall we had a Retail Furniture Sector Outlook webinar about 3 weeks ago. So today we'll be focusing on corporate and bespoke furniture. And what does the sector outlook look like over the next 12 months? I am joined by an esteemed panel today of really great individuals who have kindly offered to support us with this webinar. Many of you may remember Chris Gilmore, who was a speaker in our last session, where he focused on the retail outlook and specifically the economic outlook for retail. Today, he'll be touching on retail and looking into the bespoke and corporate markets and giving us some of his insights there. And then I'm joined with three other panelists. We've got Robin Self, who is owner of multiple businesses, as well as a director of the IID. We have Haldane Martin, who is the owner and creative behind his brand Haldane Martin. And we have Livia Kutsia-Stein, who is the creative executive at DHQ Interior Brand Architects, whose predominant client is Famous Brands. So I think today is going to be a very interesting session. We've got a very dynamic panel which target various subsectors of the corporate and bespoke market. And I think there'll be some very interesting insights for everyone here today. I'd like to say a special thank you to our funders and partners, specifically the Ethekwini Municipality Sector Programs Unit, who are our seed funders for the Ethekwini Furniture Cluster, as well as Trade and Investment KZN, who without the two of these funders, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. And I'd also just like to thank our partners who have partnered in this series over the last two sessions, being SAFI and the IID. So a big thank you to them. And again, a thank you to these panelists for assisting us today. Right, Chris, can I hand over to you?
Thank you, Paige. Right, could you give me the first slide, please? Okay, as Paige says, we're going to rattle through these things at a rate of knots, and I apologize for the depressing overtones that may come across in this one. But it really is it's a thoroughly depressing outlook. And anyone who's seen the second quarter GDP figures that came out yesterday will understand why it's depressing. Yeah, this is just the OECD graph showing roughly where we're looking at what their view is in South Africa for the year as a whole for 2020 and 2021, providing we don't get a second wave. The red line would be if a second wave comes in, the blue line is a single hit. I think the likelihood of a second wave anywhere in the world is receding rapidly. The virus is on the run in most parts of the world. And I think it's particularly in the developed world, and we're seeing it in South Africa as well. It's going away pretty rapidly, even without a vaccine. I think the chances are that it certainly won't be eradicated, but we'll have to live with the virus for quite some time. But I think it'll be under much better control in the next few months. Yeah, this is just an indication of how South Africa compares with many other countries in the world in terms of that GDP figure we got out yesterday. Now, a lot of people got the impression it was minus 51%. That 51% was a quarter-on-quarter annualized figure. The actual year-on-year was 17.1%. So it's bad, but it's not nearly as bad as, say, Peru, for example, which is the worst in the world that I can see, at over 30% year-on-year. India minus 23.9, Spain minus 22.1, UK minus 21.7, very much for muchness with Malaysia and Italy around about the 17%. Look, it's nothing to be proud of, it's bad, and how on earth South Africa is going to pull itself out of this hole is beyond me at this point in time. Yeah, government's thrown an awful lot of money at the problem. 300 million in terms of the relief package, another 200 billion in terms of the stimulus package. But it's not very targeted. It's not like Rishi Sunak in the UK, for example, with his eat out to help out, very targeted approach. It's a bit of a shotgun approach, and That's not even allowing for the fact that there's been a lot of looting in the system. Unemployment rising very rapidly. We've got the highest sustained unemployment, persistent rate of unemployment of any country in the world. And we're probably going to be looking at around about 50% unemployment in the next year or so. As I say, 17.1% year on year, that was the GDP growth rate, or 51% quarter on quarter annualized. That annualized figure is not really that relevant. The TERS benefits finished at the end of last month. So that's going to be, in terms of spending, that's going to be drying up. Debt to GDP will become unsustainable post the lockdown. We're already around about 80% debt to GDP, probably going to well over 100% over the next year or so. Tito Mbowene's got an incredibly difficult job in the MTBPS next month, and then in his budget in February. Tax rises are going to be inevitable. It really is. We've got a budget deficit, a tax deficit of something like 50 billion rands a month. Now, Edward Kieswetter is a brilliant mind, but he's got his work cut out for him as well. So there's been a severe lockdown. That has had a very lasting negative impact on the economy. Retail sales, we'll see those in a moment, slumped overall by about 50% in April, bounced back a bit in May, and leveling off a bit in June. We get the July figures out next month. And of course, the real joker in the pack is rolling blackouts, load shedding. And people like Chris Yelland and Anton Eberhard, if you read their work, they'll demonstrate unequivocally that this is going to cripple the economy, even if we had a plan to get out of the situation post-COVID. But as we know, there actually isn't a plan. So load shedding is going to be a feature for at least the next 2 years, and I would say at least the next 5 years, because Andre de Ruyter, the new CEO, has said unequivocally he wants to implement a thing called philosophy maintenance, whereby you take plants down for 3 months, up to 3 months at a time, to get back to OE specifications, and that will take time. It's the right thing to do, it's the only thing to do, but there are other ways to play this thing, which we may go into at the end. That's the retail sales growth figure that I showed you, slumping in April as many things were closed down, coming back a bit in May, and leveling off a bit in June. And this really just, if you look at the arrow here, that's just looking at the segments. Furniture was the only sector in the June figures that recorded a positive bounce. So back in positive territory. And I don't know if you listened to the Lewis presentation last week. Fascinating, again, endorsing a lot of what is going on in the big figures there. They've actually had a reasonable figure. If you strip the actual COVID situation out of it, they would have been not that badly affected at all. So yeah, look, I think there's no doubt about it. There are reasons to be optimistic in terms of demand up until this point in time for furniture. The big question now, of course, is what happens as more and more people are unemployed and there's less money about physically. That's just Bank Serve Africa's take-home pay graph. Something like 1/5 of all employees didn't receive a salary in June. I haven't got the July figures yet, but again, it's a pretty dismal picture. I'm going to rattle through these very quickly. This is just the UK. You can see nice big bounce coming through there, as you would expect, in terms of the opening up the economy there. That's the US. That may be changing in America because the checks that they were getting up until the end of August, that's now a bone of contention. They were getting $600 a week checks. Those have now gone. Trump is talking about instituting a $300 a week check, but he doesn't actually have the authority to do so. So that could put a bit of a brake on US retail sales growth. Chinese retail sales growth, again, a similar sort of pattern to South Africa, bouncing back but leveling off. Strangely enough, while manufacturing in China is pretty much back to normal, output is pretty much back to normal, they're having to rely on very much in the way of internally generated growth. And the locals, the local Chinese, are very wary of going out and spending. So retail has not recovered in China, whereas the rest of the economy has pretty much recovered. And again, just to finish it off there, the Euro area, again, similar type of pattern. We said both in the CFTL presentation and in the furniture one, I think there is scope for a further degree of onshoring. As we know, the master plan is only going to be coming out in November. But I think China has been its own worst enemy. Look, this isn't going to be the last pandemic. There will be others of these in the future, hopefully not as severe. But I think China's demonstrated they won't hesitate to lock down cities, regions, if they have outbreaks. So I think there's some very good reasons why many countries around the world, never mind the anti-Chinese sentiment, there are good financial and economic reasons why you would want to have more in the way of onshoring and getting better local supply chains. Demand for this bespoke and corporate furniture, I think at the top end, demand is still pretty strong. You know, the top end hasn't been affected as badly as the middle to lower end. The middle has been particularly badly hit. Work from home, that phenomenon, that I think, it depends how long this goes on for. If it carries on for the foreseeable future, then the office workspace, there'll be less demand, I think, for corporate furniture. But it depends. And again, a lot of this comes back to this whole circular story about load shedding. If load shedding is going to be a feature for the next 2 to 3 years, I think many more firms are going to get their people back to the office sooner rather than later, getting them back from working from home, because their ability to work will be seriously compromised if they haven't got power for their home Wi-Fi, this type of thing. So again, there are many reasons why it's not just a linear situation that may happen with respect to the working from home phenomenon. Over and above that, I think obviously many corporate furniture manufacturers may well be able to pivot into that work from home space to an extent. Okay, this is really just a conclusion. I think, yeah, your bedding, that's usually a very, very resilient type of area. But obviously that's been hit as far as the hospitality sector has been concerned. The international inbound tourism sector isn't slated to open up until April at the earliest. Our wonderful tourism minister has been given all the information, and yet she steadfastly refuses, along with Ethekwini Furniture, to do anything about opening up the international borders. Now, if that's the case, I think it means that demand for mattresses and hotels won't be anywhere near what it usually would be. So we've still got intense lobbying by SATSA, and they make the very cogent point that if you don't get international tourism up and running, or indications out to the airlines this month or next, then it's pretty much game over, because the period between October and March, that 6-month window, is critical. People need to make longer term plans. So we're in a very, very critical stage at this point in time. Online demand is undoubtedly improving. And something that we threw in here, it's an interesting idea. Millennials, by their very nature, don't like holding on to things. They're not wild about consumer durables. And furniture, other than cars, is the ultimate consumer durable. Is it possible that you could see a rental market developing in that sector? I haven't seen it yet. I think it's a possibility. Yeah, some non-COVID considerations. And I say the rolling blackouts likely to remain for quite some time. The electricity supply situation could be restored very quickly and very efficiently. And this isn't rocket science. I mean, we're talking literally about putting in a whole series of relatively small gas-powered, eco-friendly power plants all around the country, mainly supplying the corporate sector, bypassing Eskom completely. So we're not talking about privatizing Eskom in any way, shape, or form, and maybe not even wheeling it through their distribution network. It can be, and Chris Yelland will testify to this, it can be sorted out between 6 and 18 months on a permanent basis. But I think political ideology gets in the way. And then if we look at, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the work of Professor Haroon Bharat of UCT. in terms of the work he's done on economic complexity. And just in very broad terms, what that means is that South Africa has got a wonderful manufacturing base. Yes, it's been degraded over the years, but it's still there. And it's possible that just by tweaking it in certain places, you can, for example, move from shirts to blouses, that type of thing. And in the manufacturing of furniture arena, I suspect there are many areas where you could actually get the kind of improvements that we'd be looking for, and the improvements to the supply chains with using the existing skills base, and not having to really go overboard here. So I would definitely recommend that if you haven't seen Haroon Bharat's work, go and have a look at it. It's fascinating. Really, just to conclude, the work from home phenomenon, double-edged sword, I think, for the industry. On the one hand, it's taking away from the corporate side into offices and the like. But on the other side, I think there is definitely the ability to pivot into that. Pent-up demand, we've seen it coming through in May and in June. Is it going to continue? Not so sure. I think unemployment is definitely going to wreak havoc in the furniture space a few months down the track. I think Black Friday will obviously be very pivotal in this regard. Furniture retailing landscape, I think, very different to what it was even a few years ago. Product, as we said in the last one, is now critically important. It's not so much the financing that's the important thing. As I mentioned in the last presentation, a JD executive talking about this pesky furniture. If it wasn't for pesky furniture, they'd make so much more money on financial services. But that was a long time ago in the past. The economy, I think, unlikely to rebound quickly. We'll get an improvement in Q3 undoubtedly, but nothing like getting back to where the country was in 2019. Economists like Mike Schuessler, for example, are talking about taking maybe 5 or even 10 years to get back to the 2019 GDP levels if structural reform is not instituted on a profound basis. So I think consumer spending is likely to remain extremely weak, extremely subdued. Your discretionary side of things, and you don't get much more discretionary, as I say, than furniture. And load shedding, unfortunately, exacerbates an already dreadful situation. I warned you it was going to be depressing. And with that, I'll hand you back to Paige.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, it can always be a little bit overwhelming when you hear the stats and figures associated with the economy and the direction we're going. And what's great about your presentation is you sort of provided us with the so what. I mean, we see all these headlines in the news, but we often don't really understand where it can go. So thanks for shedding light on that. And although looking a little bit bleak, I do believe that there is huge opportunity for the sector, and I'm hoping that our discussions now, as we go into the panelist discussion, will really shed light on that. So Chris, I wanted to say a massive thank you again for spending time with us today and sharing these insights with us. They're very interesting. Thank you. So with that, I'm going to move into the panelist discussion. And I'd like to flag to all of our attendees today that you can utilize the Q&A function if you have any questions specifically for our panel, as well as for Chris. And we will be consolidating the Q&A questions and presenting in a Q&A in the last 15 minutes of the session. So please use the Q&A function for that. If you would just like to have general chatter, you're welcome to use the chat function. But if I could ask that you specifically use the Q&A function for your questions, that would be great. So without further ado, let me open up the panelist discussion. And I'd like to start with chatting with Robin. Robin, you obviously work quite a lot in the corporate space. What has the impact of COVID been on basically corporate buying of furniture during this time?
So possibly with the last two months or so, we've noticed that there's probably about a 30% less occupied workplace interior. What we're spending our time doing now is reshuffling offices and condensing open plan spaces into more cubicle type layouts. And pretty much making them COVID compliant at this stage. The projects are not, there's not a lot of expansion happening at the moment that I've noticed. Office interiors, there's a bit of a holdback on making decisions on how they're going to move forward, because they're still assessing if they're going to be fully occupied or have 50% less staff within the space.
Sure, thanks. And I know you also do a bit of work in the retail interior space. Have you seen any changes there?
There too, a lot of the retailers are putting their main focus onto their online shops at the moment. So I've found that a lot of projects we had in the pipeline have been put on hold while they assess what the appetite is for the public to venture into malls and open public spaces. So there too, everybody's holding back somewhat until, certainly for the next few months.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks for sharing, Robin. Haldane, you are more in more of a bespoke high-end type of market. Have you seen any changes in that space due to the onset of COVID?
Hi, Paige. Yes, definitely. So we sell high-end furniture. Traditionally, our main markets is the hospitality sector, boutique hotels and restaurants, game lodges, that sort of thing, selling through interior designers. We've found that the hospitality side of things has almost disappeared. There's one or two projects that were initiated prior to COVID-19 that are still being completed, although also they've been delayed by about 9 months. But what we have seen is that there has been an upswing in the high-end residential markets, where wealthy people are forced to spend more time at home and are wanting to upgrade and beautify their homes. So we are seeing, where the hospitality has dropped off, we have seen an upswing in high-end residential projects.
Okay, great. Thanks, Haldane. Are there any specific types of projects in the high-end residential space that you're seeing a larger demand for?
Well, we before COVID-19, about 2 years ago, we started focusing on the outdoor side of furniture, as we identified a gap in the local markets for outdoor furniture. And people are definitely spending a lot more on their patios. I think when one's forced to stay at home for long periods of time, then the outdoor space becomes more important as just a little bit of a relief from on the four walls. So yeah, we've seen people spending more money on their outdoor furniture, particularly at this time.
Brilliant. Thanks, Haldane. Thanks for sharing. And now, Olivia, we've spoken about how COVID has impacted buyers right now, but maybe could you shed some light on what you foresee the impact is going to be in the next 12 months based on your experience of working with famous brands and other similar companies?
I think the kind of demand on furniture is under pressure, and it's probably less positive to hear. We see at the moment with our restaurant environments, some of their furniture is packed away because of the social distancing requirements. And what this is causing is also more kind of needs for smaller footprints, smaller spaces. And that's got a direct impact then on your furniture requirement and your quantities. On the other side of that, we also have massive drive on value. So the new kind of buzzwords is value engineering, where people are almost kind of keeping their furniture items, but how do I rework or repurpose to suit my needs and make sure that I kind of, relook my image so that the customer sees some sort of shift, but I'm still holding on to my furniture pieces. So I think there is going to be that kind of understanding on how do I rework pieces for the next lifespan of my restaurant. So maybe my next revamp cycle. And then more than that, I mean, how do we kind of work around this demand on space? We've seen massive drive and increase on takeaway and delivery, which has meant that there's less demand on seating space. We see big skews of sales towards that, which means that my sit-down environment is under. But then I've also got to make sure that when I do have a customer that's coming to sit down, that I almost enhance that experience for them. So it would be something that's more kind of like a quick service. So you want someone to sit down and leave. Now you almost want to kind of invest in the furniture, invest in the seating, make it comfortable, ensure from a customer experience that there is that comfort element. So in terms of like the restaurant behavior, it's really shifting, but in terms of demand, I think it's going to be under pressure.
Great. Thanks, Livia. And it's interesting to hear. I mean, you're working with big brands, so your demand isn't necessarily driven by the end user. Can you maybe just talk a bit to that when it comes to receiving a brief from a corporate and the pressures it puts you under in terms of your buying potential?
Yeah, I mean, it's really around value. Like I spoke about it in the kind of first portion, but we sell business models essentially. So, I mean, we work with our clients are all franchise brands. So they sell the business model. And for us, we've got to make sure that we align to their kind of cost brackets and cost parameters. So in terms of kind of costs, it's a major focus for us. So it's really around volume versus kind of these bespoke pricing brackets. But I mean, on the positive side, restaurants are almost kind of clawing back. We're seeing them reinvest in their spaces. So we're seeing that happening. But it's from our side, it's always our responsibility to make sure that cost is top of mind, but it can't compromise, you know, customer comfort, and it can't compromise your customer experience. So cost is a major, but it's also about how we work with our suppliers to get to that ultimate price. But a lot of it is around the negotiations and pricing on volume because of the rollout capacity.
Okay, great. Thanks, Livia. You know, and Livia, you mentioned costs quite a bit, and I know Robin has some similar thoughts on costs as well as the comfort and use of the customer. So Robin, maybe I can just ask you, you know, what are your views on where furniture is going in the next 12 months? What is the customer wanting?
I think there's definitely going to be a move more towards very versatile furniture and shelving systems where spaces can be reconfigured and refitted with different merchandising options to suit layouts and maximize the space, but also to be able to update a space without having to do a full revamp. So I think the furniture items that retailers and restaurant owners will invest in are more flexible options.
Great, thanks, Robin. And where do you think design fits into this when it comes to making these spaces what they need to be?
Well, I think now more than ever, interior design designers, the profession, plays a huge role in getting your space right, because we need to foresee the potential space changes that might be required going forward. We might have to reduce a size of a space by about 50%, and a clever design and a clever system would be able to accommodate these changes.
And now, Robin, a lot of the work that you sort of do a lot of the concept development yourself and then work with manufacturers to support that. With COVID and the need for less engagement, but also more design, what are the implications there for what I think you could call the gap between manufacturers and design capabilities?
I think there's going to be a larger role for furniture designers to move into the space, because I think we're going to rely less on import. So we're going to have to be able to design very cost-effective solutions using local designers. And I think furniture designers are going to play a much larger role going forward.
Definitely. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Livia, do you think this crisis will have an impact on imported furniture? And more specifically, is there an opportunity to expand your local supply base based on that?
I think there's a massive opportunity, actually. So what this kind of pandemic has caused is for us to support local. So South Africans, as we know it, we're very pro-local, but I think it's our responsibility now more than ever is to collaborate with local manufacturers, local suppliers, to make sure that we don't kind of rely on the import component. But I understand that there's also limitations. So if I look at kind of our basket of specification, probably 100% of our kind of timber substrate furniture is local, but we're restricted with more your kind of polyprop furniture, possibly even some of the kind of metal work, and it all boils down to range. So where we can, we 100% support local, but other times we're quite restricted on what's available. But I know in terms of, you know, South African knows its local, knows local best from, I say almost from customer to climate. So everything in between, we understand it. So this is probably the best opportunity to leverage off this pandemic and make sure that we now kind of design with local, support each other, collaborate together, so that there isn't this kind of import component unnecessarily.
That's great, and that's so positive to hear. It's really nice when you engage with furniture buyers and realize that they are doing a lot to support local. But obviously, as you mentioned, there are gaps. And so maybe, Robin, I can just ask you, I mean, you do a lot of work in Africa, not just South Africa. Is there still localization opportunity in those spaces?
I think the main reason why a lot of the projects I work on, the clients import directly from China, and that has to do with cost. But if we can get costs down, I think we can bring that market locally, which is important for the industry.
And obviously, I mean, you've mentioned to me when we've had discussions that your preference is always to support local, but one of your challenges is that your customer is very cost driven, and you're not necessarily always the buyer when it comes to that. So what advice would you give to a local manufacturer to give them more context to understand the sort of operating environment you're in that forces you to often import?
I think the costs in this country are driven by the ESCOM issues and the lack of support from government. If we had a government which really supported the sector, I think that we could afford to bring costs down on the manufacturing side, and then sell and design using our local products.
Okay, great. Thanks, Robin. And maybe just dovetailing off of that, Haldane, I mean, you not only design your own products, but you also outsource the manufacture of those products, and you work very closely with manufacturers, and you have done so for many years. What advice could you give to local manufacturers and suppliers to open up opportunities, specifically now that we can leverage off of this COVID-19 crisis?
I think what's really important is that manufacturers stay abreast with technology, specifically computer-aided manufacturing. I think all the factories that I still deal with that I started dealing with 20 years ago, that I'm still dealing with, they've all invested in CNC, computer-controlled manufacturing, as the backbone to their production facility. There's still a lot of handwork involved, and I don't think we'll ever really get away from that. But when a factory has a CNC machine at the heart of its process, that factory tends to stay competitive. And they also are able to do smaller runs and still be efficient, because the computer can change, you can laser cut 10 things one size and then another 5 things another size, and it makes no difference in the efficiency. And so, yeah, that's what I would advise manufacturers to do. And also for us personally, we are finding that our clients are definitely buying less, but I think there's, along with this, the drive to support local and to buy local, there's also people are wanting, because they're buying less, they're being more cautious about what they choose, and they're choosing quality and design quality over, yeah, that's in our sector of the market. Obviously, we're in the high-end sector, so people are buying less, but they're wanting more quality, and in that way get their value out. But then going back to manufacturing, also as a designer, over the last 10 years, computer-aided design has become really important, and that has helped us communicate better with our suppliers, and we're able to create digital files and design information that makes the manufacturing process and the prototyping process a lot easier and a lot quicker. So I think, we've seen with COVID-19 that there's been this move to the digital space in online shopping and so on. But I think also on the design and manufacturing side, a good strategy is to move more and more into the digital and the computer-aided manufacturing side.
Great, thanks, Haldane. I mean, you've covered manufacturing really well, and you also sell direct to market yourself, which I think there are a lot of other furniture manufacturers that do the same. What advice would you give to manufacturers specifically around this move towards e-commerce and digitization?
Yeah, so our main customers have always been interior designers, and I've also worked as an interior designer myself. What we realized being acting as an interior designer, that interior design process has also become more digital, and so 3D models of the furniture is really is an important sales tool. So all of our designs, we have the 3D models available on our website that clients can download and then drop into their own interior 3D models and then render them easily. So that's been really important for us, and I think a lot more local furniture designers and manufacturers should, if they aren't already, they should make their 3D models available. I know there's been in the past, people have worried that it opens you up to being copied a lot easier and quicker, and I think that is obviously a risk. But I think the benefit of making that information available to your customers, the interior designers, outweighs that risk of being copied. I think as an interior designers, we work all hours, and so if an interior designer can download a model off your website, 10 o'clock at night, and not have to wait for someone to email the model to them, then that piece of furniture is likely to be specified over and above something where there is no 3D model available. And the same goes for the finishes. They should also be made available so that the interior designer can apply the right fabric or powder coating finish to that piece. And then, we do our best to make the interior design process quick and efficient for our customers.
That's great. Thanks, Haldane. And you actually have a very interesting process of testing out products online. Maybe you could just briefly share what that is.
Yeah, so over the last year or two, we've been designing new pieces in Rhino 3D modeling software, and then rendering them and then putting those designs onto Instagram and seeing what kind of a response we get. And if something really gets a huge response online, then we know that that's what we need to prototype as quickly as possible and realize. And also during lockdown, where we weren't able to do photo shoots, location photo shoots with our furniture. We've started 3D modeling locations, buildings, and then putting in photographic backgrounds and creating, quite aspirational photorealistic renders of our furniture in buildings and houses. And there's one in the Serengeti, another in the Karoo. So while we haven't been able to do photo shoots, we've been doing renders. And when one is presenting the images on Instagram, you can hardly tell the difference between a photograph and a render. So, and that's also cut our marketing expenses. A photo shoot can cost hundreds of thousands of rand if you add up all the furniture you have to make, the location you have to rent, the photographer, the post-production work, the transport to the site. All of that can cost hundreds of thousands of rands, where you could do the same job, sitting on your computer for a day, creating a good render. So yeah, we spent a lot of time developing the digital side of our business, and that has become a competitive advantage for us.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Haldane. Maybe I could jump to Olivia then. When it comes to buying from local manufacturers, what are the things that you're looking for specifically?
If I think top of mind on some of the suppliers we work with, they make it easy to work with them. So there's some kind of suppliers that we almost call partners in our business. So we work closely with them, we collaborate with them, and to be honest, we rely quite strongly on their expertise and their knowledge. So very often we'll say, this is the kind of look and feel we're after, this is the price range, this is the kind of environment that it's going to be in, and work together to get to that kind of end goal. But yeah, we're actually quite blessed with some really good suppliers, because I think we've got great designers and manufacturing kind of partners in our country. We've got great manufacturers.
That's awesome. That's so good to hear. But obviously there's a challenge that not all suppliers are equal. And I'm sure you've had challenges in sourcing those suppliers initially as well.
I think we've bumped our head a few times and learned our lessons, dusted ourselves off and tried again, which is the nature of what we do in design. So yeah,
definitely. And maybe then just pulling on that, as designers, with between Haldane, who does a lot of the coordination of his manufacturing amongst different manufacturers, and then Olivia, you mentioning that as designers you do a lot of project management. Robin, you're also quite familiar with the project management space, being a designer. Maybe you can just talk to how you need to pull the strings in terms of your cross-functional relationships amongst manufacturers, and just talk to what the implications are on you and your business as well.
I think in the past we've relied so heavily on import of components and small nuts and bolts items from China. I think having suppliers here who are able to supply these items locally will really help with the design process. And I also think that there's been little investment into the transfer of skills. So I think that it would really help to bring back the apprenticeship programs where you have joiners and turners who are guided through, because it's years and years of experience that makes you a pro at this. And I think to have really a skilled supplier or factory who's able to do beautifully custom made items would really also allow us to procure custom made furniture here.
Great. Thanks, Robin. Thanks so much. And maybe while I've got you on, maybe I can just ask you then, we've discussed COVID, we've discussed sort of consumer trends, but what specifically do you think the impact of recession will have on the industry, specifically, you know, budgets for furniture, etc., going forward?
I think the budgets will be much lower going forward. I've noticed a downward trend over the last few years, actually, in project budgets. So I think having designing spaces that are flexible, that with items that don't date as quickly, that aren't specifically following a certain trend. We need timeless furniture that will last, you know, 10, 20 years, as opposed to throwaway pieces that are just suitable for a season, because we just don't have the budgets any longer to be able to update our interiors as frequently as we used to.
Cool, thanks, Robin. And I know, Aldane, you've got a slightly different view on trends when it comes to the direction you feel that they're going. Maybe you could just share, firstly, what is driving the rapid change in furniture trends, and what do products need to do to keep up with those trends?
What I've found is that the customer has become a lot more informed about current trends. And I think a big platform that's creating this awareness in the marketplace are things like Pinterest and Instagram, that we're all spending a lot more time on these platforms, and we are exposed to millions of new images every day. And I actually think it's sort of speeding up the trend cycle. And I found that it's really important that we constantly are evolving our brand identity and our product offering to be expressing current trends. At the same time, you know, I think a sort of a meta trend is this trend to products that have more integrity, that have good quality and ethics built into them. You know, that is a sort of a meta trend that's spanning over everything. But at the same time, yeah, your average consumer is a lot more trend savvy than they were a few years ago, and I would say mainly because of Pinterest and Instagram. Yeah, so as a designer myself, you know, my challenge is to constantly stay relevant and to constantly be reinventing myself and our product offering.
Thanks, Haldane. And it's interesting how these perspectives come together. And I think there's a common thread that's sort of come across in this whole session, is that the importance of customization as well as functionality, those two seem to be quite core, and those are very strongly linked to strong design. And if there's any message that comes out of today, I think that's the key message. Whilst these different, you know, between your franchises versus your retail interiors, corporate interiors, to your high-end, more affluent private residence, you know, that's the common thread that goes through. And I just really want to just thank you quickly to our panelists to be able to try cross those different barriers and have this discussion here today. I'm gonna jump quickly into the Q&A. We haven't received too many questions, so I would like to just start with the first question that was posed, which asked, have any of the panelists seen a move towards multi-use type home furniture with a greater emphasis on practicality and quality? And I'll open that up to anyone to respond.
I mean, I actually had noted it as an opportunity to create kind of multi-use ranges, almost kind of desk by day, dining by night kind of approach. So where, you know, pieces become flexible, can be customized to suit needs, finishing can be customized. I think there's actually an opportunity in it.
Yeah, something that's that we've also noticed as a good competitive advantage as a local manufacturer is having a wide variety of finish options. So we've invested in developing our own powder coating colors. You know, we offer 19 powder coated finishes and about 100 different fabric finishes for our upholstery. And if you combine those, you know, you end up with almost thousands of finish variants in our. So we have a set catalog of items that we offer, but we allow our customers to customize as far as finishes is concerned, and also with tables. And we also customize on sizes, and the same with couches. Yeah, so offering that kind of flexibility in finishes has been very important for us, and I know that our interior designers appreciate being able to get the exact ocean blue and pastel turquoise and so on color that they want for their corporate identity, or for their interior identity for their residential clients.
Awesome. Thanks both of you. Maybe a question then I can pose to all of you, but offer Robin as the first opportunity to respond. This question came from Des, and he asked, how are you looking at the African market to try increase sales or output?
I think it just boils down to exactly what Haldane spoke about, where he's made his models and a range of furniture available in CAD format, so that designers can actually design their interiors using local products as opposed to just downloading a standard template off the web. If South African designers make their items available in that format, we of course will design using their products.
Okay, awesome, thank you. And maybe then building on that, where we had a question from Joy, which is, how can small manufacturers doing bespoke furniture look at expanding their customer base?
We found that Instagram is a really effective form of marketing. I think it's last year we probably did 70% of our sales were from leads that we got through Instagram. So I think that's really important, is to build an Instagram following, and to constantly be putting your designs into that space. Yeah, you know, with it, and I think that's become even more important with a lot of the decor magazines coming to an end now during lockdown. Yeah, so I would, and then also building a really good website that is both aspirational but also very functional for the design trade customers.
Okay, brilliant, thanks. And maybe a question to Livia is, how do you know if a manufacturer is good or not, if you haven't tried them yet?
I mean, when we kind of meet with suppliers and manufacturers, some of them have actually been great at sales. And then kind of when it comes to the execution and building to deadlines, etc., they've just fallen short. But I think that we've been fair in saying, you know, we give free opportunity to kind of most manufacturers. But when we've got pressure with large volumes or commitment to rollouts, you rely on the bigger guys because they can simply handle the volume. So, you know, they stick to spec, they can build up the volume, and it makes it easier to work with them. But it's not a bad thing to kind of work with the smaller guys, because you also want to give them an opportunity. You know, when you have access to all the brands we work on, you do want to help the smaller kind of manufacturers, you know, have a great brand on their portfolio too.
Yeah, and if I can jump in and add to that, I think a factory visit is always essential before you place your first order. You know, you can get an idea on how reliable that supplier is going to be by simply how neat their workshop is. And you know, if you go to their bathroom and it's disgusting, then you know they don't care enough. So yeah, I think the factory visit is essential.
Great, thanks. And I guess then the last question that can get posed to the panel is, obviously we've got a lot of manufacturers that are searching for opportunities. You know, what is your policy when it comes to firstly finding new suppliers, but also then being contacted by potential suppliers?
So there's kind of two parts of our world, is when it's a DHQ kind of design requirement. So outside of a famous brands, you know, there's kind of multiple suppliers that will engage with, depending on your offer and if it suits our brief and our needs. When you're working on kind of more famous brands or some of the other franchisors that we work with, there's a large portion that you need to be compliant with. It includes the right kind of equipment in manufacturing equipment. It includes just kind of a whole vetting process in terms of financial. So there's a whole, you know, whole more complex side of it. But when it's DHQ side and it's maybe a smaller project, there is always that opportunity to get in at a smaller project. And you never know if that opens up opportunity to work on the bigger brands.
Thanks, Livia. And with that, I'm going to have to close off the Q&A session. But thanks to all our panel for responding to those questions so eloquently and well and under pressure. So really appreciate it. And yeah, just a massive thank you again to our panel for assisting us with today's session, and again to our partners and our funders. Just a sector announcement for everyone. The DTEC is running a furniture design competition and they're calling for entries. So I'd really encourage all of you to submit an entry. We will circulate the forms with the notes from today's session as well as the video for you, so you can access it there. And we'd also really just appreciate your feedback. You'll notice when you close your Zoom browser that a short questionnaire will pop up. If we could ask that you could complete it, it will take you 2 seconds just to let us know how you found the session and did you find it helpful. For any more information, you're welcome to contact the Ethekwini Furniture Cluster. Our email is efc@bmanalysts.com, and we really look forward to seeing all of you in future sessions. So again, a massive thank you to our panelists. We really appreciate having you on the call, and thanks to everyone that attended. Good afternoon, everybody, and have a good week.